Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of The Manly Catholic. This is James, your host. And in this episode, I will be speaking with Daniel Fitzpatrick. Daniel is the author of 2 novels, a poetry collection, and a translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. His book, Restoring the Lord's Day, which is right here, which is what the main focus of our conversation will be, is from Sophia Institute Press. He is the editor of Jour de Devoir, a journal of art, culture, and letters for South Louisiana. I am so sorry, Daniel. I totally butchered that. My French is terrible. A member of the Creative Assembly at the New Orleans Museum of Art and a teacher at Jesuit High School in New Orleans, where he lives with his wife and 4 children. Now, again, we'll be talking about his latest book, which is Restoring the Lord's Day, How Reclaiming Sunday Can Revive Our Human Nature. It's such an important topic about reclaiming the 4th commandment, which is to honor the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. I think it's something that has really sort of gone by the wayside in our culture today. So I think it's a very important topic for you, and I can't wait for you guys to listen. Thank you all so much for your prayers, for your support. Gosh, I'm so humbled to say thank you so much for all those who support the podcast. Thank you for, I always ask that if you're watching on YouTube, you please hit that subscribe button. Please share this with a friend. Please hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening to your podcast. It really helps reach the show, grow the audience, and please leave a review as well. And if you are able to, we'd love for you to support us on our Patreon page. And if you support us at the $20 a month or more level, we will send you a free bag of Mystic Monk coffee, and we'll even pay for the shipping as well. And I'm actually just announcing this now. I had a friend redesign you probably have noticed we've redesigned the logo for the Manly Catholic, and we're hoping one day we'll be selling merchandise, so shirts, hats, coffee mugs, because I love coffee. But that will be coming at a later date. But I just wanted to give you guys a little heads up on that. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Daniel Fitzpatrick regarding his latest book, Restoring the Lord's Day. More importantly, how we can reclaim Sunday to be a Sabbath and a holy day. Thank you all again so much for listening, and God bless you. Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of The Manly Catholic. This is James, your host, and with me tonight, I have a guest I'm very excited to be speaking with. It is Daniel Fitzpatrick. Daniel, welcome to the Manly Catholic Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here.
Yeah, and tonight we're going to be talking about Daniel's latest book, which is called Restoring the Lord's Day, How Reclaiming Sunday Can Revive Our Human Nature. And I know we've talked briefly about this on the podcast, but I'm really excited to deep dive into this topic, obviously in reflection of the 4th commandment, which is to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. And before we get into that topic, though, Daniel, we'll start with the Hail Mary. So we'll start in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, Daniel, the question I always like to ask my guests to lead us off: if you could be the patron saint of anything, what would it be and why?
Yes. I spent a lot of time this morning pondering this, and the first thing that comes to mind is patron saint of fishermen. I feel that's really impinging on some of my territory. So I'm trying to think with as much as I love the city of New Orleans, nothing could give me greater joy than to be the patron saint of New Orleans.
Okay.
It's a city that's so dear to me. I mean, it's where I grew up. So I spent most of my life. And it's just such a beautiful place. I mean, really, it's been like another parent with respect to my own Catholicism. So the city has done so much for just giving me the gift of faith. So, yeah.
I love that. Patron saint of New Orleans. Now, and Daniel, I would love to go to New Orleans. I've actually never been. I'm from California, and living in Michigan now. So if I ever venture down there, I might be giving you a call and looking for some places to go. But so where are you now? Are you able to fish quite a bit where you're at?
Yeah, so I'm in New Orleans now.
Okay.
So I grew up here, went to the University of Dallas, and then came back here, taught for a few years, moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where I spent 5 years.
Okay.
Spent a year in Tampa, and then moved back here. Been back here for about 2 years now. I do get to fish a little bit. I teach, I have 4 children. So my fishing time is a little limited. Uh, Mostly when I am fishing, it's with my kids, which is a great joy. But, there's less fishing on my part.
Sure.
But that's how it was when I was teaching up. So
That's beautiful.
it's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, jambalaya and gumbo are two of my personal. I love the Cajun spice and seasoning. So I definitely need to venture down to your parts one day. But all right, so let's dive into your book, Daniel. So this, I love this topic because I think it's something that is lost, and you kind of touched on that briefly in your book as well. But you also talk about a specific sin, which obviously is one of the 7 deadly sins, but I think a lot of people, again, kind of brush off, don't really understand the fullness of that. But before we dive into those two topics, let's talk about, I guess, why you felt the need in this day and age to write a book about the 4th commandment of restoring the Lord's Day, and why it actually is so important, not just obviously spiritually, but just for our humans as well.
Yeah, so I think it begins on a kind of experiential level and then moves to a sort of intellectual level after that. So when I was a kid, I was really blessed to grow up in a beautiful parish in downtown New Orleans. Sunday was really important to my family, and I think I was really formed again just by being in this incredibly beautiful space Sunday after Sunday. Nonetheless, especially when I was young, kind of in grammar school, and then in high school too, I found Sunday to be a day when I experienced a lot of anxiety, just because, I was thinking about, I've got all this homework to finish up. I've got these tests coming up this week. I've got, that essay to write. All these sort of responsibilities sort of looming, causing this anxiety in me. And so it wasn't until later that I really articulated this, but at the time even, I just had this sense of there's something wrong here, right? That Sunday is this day of celebration. It's this day of Mass, this wonderful gift of the liturgy. But it's also the day when I'm the most stressed throughout the week. So on a sort of existential level, there's this feeling of something's wrong here. And then it wasn't until later when I was at the University of Dallas and I was doing some of my senior thesis work in philosophy and reflecting on different forms of sadness, different kinds of melancholy. And I started studying acedia. So I wrote my thesis on some of the similarities between acedia and the dark night of the soul. And just so much of what I read about acedia or sloth just struck me as so germane to my own experience. And really, there were some key points that connected it with the loss of authentic Sunday celebration. The thing that really got me started on it was a line in St. Thomas Aquinas' treatment of acedia in Summa, where he says that acedia is a sin directly contrary to the commandment to honor the Sabbath, which was really strange, really, because it seems intuitive. This is, I think, part of the reason why sloth is such a thing now. Is we tend to be, as a culture, extremely busy, and we think of sloth as just a kind of laziness or inactivity. So that, I think, is part of our cultural moment and part of our cultural problem, is that we don't realize that this very hyperactivity that we've taken on, and which so often masquerades as a kind of authentic, fulfilling productivity, is actually a deadly sin that's eating at our very capacity to be what we're meant to be contemplative beings, tending to the God who's always present to us.
Yeah, just a couple points you touched on too, and I mean I can easily relate to what you kind of experienced growing up as well. My family, both my parents weren't Christian growing up, but thank God they became Christian. I grew up Protestant, And but church was kind of, even then it was kind of wishy-washy. Like sometimes we'd go, sometimes we wouldn't. And I think you mentioned in the book too. I mean, sports was kind of like an idol or a god, so to speak. Like sport, the day revolved around sports. And it's funny you bring, this is a total selfish reason, but because I experienced the same thing too in school. Sunday night would come or Sunday afternoon. It's like, oh gosh, I have this to do. I have all these tests to prepare for, and this is what my week is coming up. But it wasn't until grad school, and again, this is a total non-holy reason how I actually figured out how important the Sabbath was. But I was in grad school, so I would like study my butt off for like 6 straight days, and I said Sunday was going to be my day. This was not when I was, hardcore into my faith. And I would say, okay, Sunday would be my day where I would like rest, basically. But my idea of rest was, of course, watching NFL football basically all day long and sitting on the couch. And but again, not the best way of form of leisure, obviously. But it it did rest my mind, because again, you have 6 days where you're going hard and you're in the books or you're working, whatever the case might be. But then just allow your body to rest, and again, because it's kind of ironic too, because God is God, right? He didn't actually need a day of rest, on the seventh day when he made creation, but he added this for us. And so it makes us take a step back and realize, okay, what is this actually about? Why is this so important? Why does God think that we need this? I love when you talk about acedia and St. Thomas Aquinas' definition, because again, I was under the impression too, it was like, oh, it's like either you're spiritual lazy or you're actually lazy, things like that. But no, he takes that so much deeper. And I just love how you bring that out in your book and you draw that, because again, even just, definitions matter and words matter, and understanding the meaning behind that too, it is so important. And I love how you dive so deep into that book. And I wanted to actually kind of kick that back to you, I guess, on my previous point with why do you feel like there was, or why do you sense God desired this specific commandment for us? Because again, God didn't need it. He didn't need a day of rest. It's not like he was tired, but he did it for us. So why do you think he allowed this particular day to be in honor of him and the Sabbath?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it goes back to the whole impetus for creation in just this overabundant love of God, that, this contemplative gaze of the Trinity, Father and Son, gazing in love upon one another, and that love welling up into this desire to give us a universe uh, in which we can be partakers in that love too. So I think everything about the Sabbath commandment comes down to when God creates the universe, He's creating a space where there can be beings created in His image and likeness, and for whom this very existence in God's image and likeness uh, is a way of participating in that contemplative joy. Right? So it's God giving us this space where we can experience the life that He has. And of course, where do we experience that more than in the liturgy? When we're physically into union with Christ in the Eucharist. I'm called to be present to God, who's always inviting us into that contemplative space with Him. I think it's really interesting with the notion of work. So like the Lord's Day, right, is meant to be the sort of locus of the whole week, where from this point of worship we can then transform all the rest of our time, and learn to live in the Lord's Day all throughout the week and all throughout our lives. And you see kind of like a pulse, like a perversion version of that with sports. Would you talk about this pause for a second?
So, Dana, why do you think it is that God gave this as one of the commandments, right? So it's the fourth commandment, like I mentioned sort of in the intro here, is to honor the Sabbath. But, of course, like I mentioned too, He's God, so He didn't need a day of rest, actually, but He he gave it to us for a reason. And I wanted to kind of ask you, why do you think God, uh, I mean, knowing human nature, obviously, but why do you think he found that this was so important that he actually made it one of the 10 commandments?
So when God creates us, he creates us in his image, according to his likeness. And so much of that, I think, rests in his desire for us to share in the sort of like eternal contemplative joy that he has in himself. So, Father and Son eternally sharing this gaze of love, then, desiring to share that love, uh, so that we have this super abundant creation in which we get to take part. And so the day of rest is this moment in which God creates a space where we can experience a share in the contemplative joy for which we're made. So I mean, I think that's where it becomes so critical in the context of the Exodus narrative and the delivering of the Ten Commandments. That commandment, which it gets the second most amount of words, you know, uh, in its text, right after the first commandment, and it kind of highlights that commandment is in some way clearing the space for the whole point of the journey of Israel, right? Which is not just to be free to do whatever they want, but to be free to experience authentic freedom, which is to be what they're made for, to be these contemplative beings gazing upon God and loving Him, and experiencing the joy of His loving gaze as well. And that's what God wants for us on Sunday. I mean, it's really interesting that you bring up the sports element, which of course I touch upon quite a bit in the book, and my editor in going through the draft was like, "You're really hammering on football really hard. Like we might need to back off a little bit." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I see what you mean." But to me, football is kind of, and I love watching football. I mean, growing up in New Orleans, always, after mass, I was watching the Saints game.
Mhm.
And it was great family time, often with my dad's big family, we'd watch the game. But the Lord's Day is meant to be this kind of focal point of our week that then spills over into the rest of our time, so that we learn to live always in the Lord's Day, always experiencing the joy of the resurrection. And what I've kind of watched growing up was sort of the progression of football and football coverage is that we're kind of being taught to live always in game day, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, Sunday is game day, but now also Monday is game day. Saturday is college game day. Friday is high school game day. We have Thursday night football. And all the rest of the time in between, we have, analysis on ESPN. So I mean, we're really like expanding. Like we never want to be outside of the joy of game day, right? We always want to be there, experiencing this delight. And I mean, just I think that's it's giving us kind of a model in whatever limited weekend fashion of what our lives as Christians should be like, right? That Sunday, the Lord's Day, the Mass is the focal point of our week, but then that spreads over into everything else, right? So we're having Wednesday night Bible study and daily Mass and Thursday night uh, you know liturgy of the hours or whatever you want to do, but so that our lives become this constant prayer, this constant experience of the joy of the resurrection.
Yeah, gosh, Dan, you touched on so many important points too, and I don't want to harp on football either, but it is true though because what is Sunday? That's NFL day, right? In fall,
Right.
it's NFL football is Sunday, and in a sense, that's almost just I want to ask you about this too. Is kind of where we went wrong because obviously this wasn't always how it is right now. But football has sort of become the god of America, if you will, so to speak. It's generating billions of dollars in revenue, and like you said, it's not only Sunday, but it's Monday night football, Thursday night. Sometimes they do like a random Wednesday night game and Saturday night games, even when college is done. So it's like, and then like you said, this ESPN constant 24/7, it's just constantly bombarded in you. And that's a really profound point that you made, is that we're almost being led to always be in game day mode. And if you think about game day, for those of you who played sports or whatever, is your adrenaline's pumping and you have your cortisol pumping and all that. But you're not meant to be in that for 24/7. Like, your body will wear out and your body's going to break down. So if you're always on 100% of the time, your body can't recharge and refresh and really focus your gaze away from the game and see, everything else that's going on as well. So that's a really good point. But I wanted to kind of dive deeper into that is, again, because this always hasn't been that way. Football always hasn't been, the God of America, so to speak. So where, I guess, is there trends in history that we've noticed? Like, I know a big part is where we've moved more into the city type of environment where agriculture used to be kind of the king, so to speak. So in your research, Daniel, did you notice a trend of things that happened throughout history that kind of led us into, being this constant bombardment of technology and stimulus?
Yeah, so maybe just to kind of ground this question in sort of an overarching element of the discussion here. So obviously, everything that we're talking about has a lot to do with time. The Lord's Day is all about sort of attuning ourselves to the eternal within the context of time. Now, acedia really preys on our being creatures who live in time. So, and this is kind of going back to Augustine in the Confessions and his discussion of time there. He says that time is nothing other than a distension of the mind, right? So this triple negativity of being drawn back into the no longer of the past, to being drawn forward into the not yet of the future, and sort of precariously balanced in this non-extended moment of the present. And he says that a lot of our problems arise from the way that we exist in time and allow time to become a cause of anxiety. So that as I'm drawn into the past, and I'm feeling bad about this conversation I had last week, I'm drawn into the future and I'm stressed. This is kind of that anxiety we talked about, when you're a kid on Sunday and you're worried about all this homework I got to do, and I've got these tests coming up and these essays I have to write. And you're not able to rest in the present. And Augustine says, we're really in trouble if as Christians we are hoping to be eternally present to God. What is that going to be like if we struggle so much to be present to Him for an hour, even for a minute at a time in this life? Acedia tends to really prey on that anxiety, and to really kind of try to paralyze us with the anxiety over what we have coming up and what is behind us, which I think is a huge part of our problem on Sunday, and a huge part of the reason that we tend to really kind of work for the weekend, right? Everything we do is like, let me escape to the weekend, and there I can kind of wrestle these moments of leisure from the otherwise sort of barren workaday existence that I have, as Joseph Pieper might put it. Ways that sort of our age has, I think, made us more prone to that being torn apart in time are kind of manifold. So one, you mentioned this kind of movement away from the land, which is, and I say this in the book, of course, cities are not, of themselves bad things, right? Cities allow for development of culture. Cities are really things that, the man of agriculture depends on anyway. But when we're in the city, especially the kind of modern city, we tend to get out of any sort of natural rhythm. So this is one thing I really felt when I lived away from New Orleans. So like when I lived in Dallas or even Tampa to some degree, but it's really easy for every day to feel the same, right? And so I mean, even if the weather's changing, guess what? I've got climate controlled everything. So maybe I feel the heat for a few minutes when I step outside, between the house and the car, whatever. But being drawn away from those sort of rhythms of nature, right, is, I think, one thing that has really become problematic for us, because then it becomes even easier just to sort of make everything horizontal and to kind of let Sunday go by the wayside in that as well. Technology too plays a really huge part in this, right? So, I mean, talk about not being present, right? Technology makes it so easy for me to, one, just like completely sort of isolate myself from people around me, like the physical here and now, which is where God's will exists for me in a very real, tangible way. Like these people, these places are God's will for me, right? And whatever work I have to do with them. But also, right, I'm constantly drawn out, through technology in time and place, right, where I'm suddenly the whole world is at my fingertips, and it's so easy to be drawn apart to sort of the whole cosmos and no longer be present to people around me, and certainly not present to the God who desires these concrete particulars from my life in some way. I mean, there's a lot more to it as well. So I think our modern economic systems have a lot to do with the way that the Lord's Day has been washed out. So, I mean, C.S. Lewis makes the point in Mere Christianity that lending at interest is kind of the one thing that all ancient cultures agree upon as a bad idea, and it's the thing on which we founded our whole way of life, basically. And I mean, it is like when you live in a society that's based on lending, suddenly my whole life gets stretched out, over the 30 years of a mortgage or the 5 years of a car loan, right? The rent that's coming up next month, the next payment, all these sorts of things that make it really difficult to be in the present. I think we could add the sexual revolution to that, which has wrought havoc on our ability to be present in so many ways. I might pause there and just I'm eager to hear from you on it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about a acedia or acedia, have you heard of the Comfort Crisis, Daniel, or have you read that book by Michael Easter?
I've
Yeah.
not read the book, but I've heard about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal. I've talked about it many times, and I listened to an audio book probably like 2 years ago, but everything you're talking about, it's just like the way but I'll just kind of give you a brief synopsis for those of you who are just hearing about it too. Basically, is Michael Easter. He goes on this huge hunting expedition in Alaska, and there's a term, and I forget the name of the term, that it's in like Eastern cultures. It's basically like it's a very difficult, challenging task that's not impossible, but it's like 50-50. You're not going to do it, or you are going to do it. Basically, it's a way to challenge yourself, especially as men. But anyways, he goes on this hunting expedition in Alaska, and he talks about each chapter. He goes into different topics like focusing on death, like the happiest cultures are those who focus on death and contemplate their death frequently. But then he talks about he realized how comfortable he was, and exactly what you were saying, and made me think of him as like everything's air condition controlled. He says like 68 degrees, everything's 68 degrees. Get in the car, 68 degrees. Get in your house, 68 degrees, and there's no change. He said that's bad for us because our ancestors, obviously out in the elements, and they had to adapt and change. It's just good for our bodies to do that. But he talked about too, because we talked about technology as well, and the importance of our brain to disconnect from that. And they've done studies on this too nowadays, neuroscience and all this research too. But basically, when you reset, when you take away all the technology, after a couple days, your brain basically reboots, so to speak, and you start remembering things. The way he described it, he's like, I remember childhood memories that I had no idea about, or I'd completely forgotten about, or I had to-do lists that my wife gave me like 3 years ago, and all of a sudden it would come to my mind. It's just because I had nothing to do. He was out in the middle. He's waiting for wild game to come across his path, so he's just sitting for like hours and hours on end. He had nothing to do. And we hate boredom in our day and age nowadays, and boredom is where creativity is sprouted, basically. And so I know you talk about too, kind of, we'll shift a little bit into the next stage, which says, okay, we know we're kind of in this crisis, but then where we can go from here. And I haven't gotten to the chapter yet, but I'm just looking at it right here. Chapter 7:8 says, "Silence the ground of music and the ground of prayer, and then noise unlimited the program of the land without Sunday." But do you mind touching on that a little bit, Daniel? So shifting again. Okay, we know obviously there's a problem. There's been certain trends throughout history that have led to this. This particular day, this particular time. But how can we sort of reclaim the Sabbath and to make it a true day of rest, and to give it back to God?
Yeah. This is the tricky part, of course. Yeah, always easy to criticize, right?
Right.
I think a lot of it has to do with learning again how to pay attention. And I mean, a lot of our problem, I think, arises from the way that we exist in time and how it is so easy to be drawn apart between the past and the future. But I mean, God made us that way, right? So it's not as if time is the enemy. I think so much of human life is learning how to gather up time in such a way that we offer it to eternity, that we learn to view time from a kind of eternal perspective. So this is where like silence and music become so important, I think. So, I mean, I don't think we need to say much about how important silence is and how difficult it is to find it. What's perhaps a little more difficult to parse out is the way that we learn to be sort of musical again, right? To have these sort of harmonized souls that are capable of attending to something. So like think about the way that we listen to a piece of music. I imagine it would be very disturbing if we didn't have these faculties of memory and anticipation. I mean, these are the things, right? This is our way of relating to time, and it's what makes music enjoyable, right? That we're able to remember what's come before, and we're able to anticipate on the sort of emotional level what's coming, right? How is this? How's the tension in this composition going to be resolved, right? How am I going to be moved by this music? That I think really gives a model for how all of our experience of time ought to be. It's a way of hearing again God's rhythms at work in the world. Have you ever read the book or seen the movie A River Runs Through It?
Heard of it, have not read it though.
Okay. Yeah, so it's one of my favorites, and I just finished teaching it with one of my classes. I teach it
Oh,
every
great.
year. But there's so much in that book about learning to hear the rhythms of God at work in the world. And that's kind of the task of being human, is learning through silence to hear sort of the divine music that's upholding everything. So music and other art forms, I think, really teach us how to be really present in time again. So not just like seizing the moment, but learning to let our attention be drawn out through time as a kind of approach to eternity. That, I think, is kind of what so much of prayer and the spiritual life is about, is learning to kind of offer up this sort of extended moment of consciousness to God, to be present to Him. And that, I mean, that's Sunday is so good as a day for allowing us to do that, right? So, I mean, when we take it seriously and kind of order the rest of our lives so that Sunday can be a moment of real rest, it becomes indeed a moment of rest, but it's a rest in the form of our sort of highest activity. So, I mean, Aristotle talks about how man's end is contemplation, right? His goal is to contemplate, to live the sort of life that God lives, and that is a rest, but it's a rest in which we're also performing the very highest activity that's available to us. Yeah, so I think so much of it comes from learning again to listen.
Well, no, music too, Daniel, is I think so underestimated, because if you truly just think about it too, a piece that really touches you, it really it touches like a deep part of you, and I can't really explain it very well, but it's almost like it goes into your soul. Just like too. I mean, we have a whole book of the Bible that's dedicated to Psalms, right? David, with most of them, and it's all music, and even the liturgy and Gregorian chant. I mean, the church just has this huge array and tradition of beautiful music that we can tap into at any time we want. And by the way, I looked up the movie A River Runs Through It, and Brad Pitt is in it, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
in the 1992 version. So in case you want to go rent it
Yeah.
at some point,
Very early
but
role for him.
yeah. But no, and this is a bit of a sidebar, but I think it is applicable. And before I met my wife, or after I met my wife and we got married, she realized that my brain works in song, so to speak. So, like if she would say something, or I would be doing a task, like I would just like randomly start singing, and it would kind of like carry on the conversation almost. And it was almost like a way for my brain to either put things together or remember things as like a mnemonic device, things like that. And I had no idea I did this until she actually pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do. And now I come to find out she said she tries to set me up to see if I would if I would carry on the song. So she would like say something to see if it would bring up. But that's a side note. But music too. Just to hit on the point, it's so beautiful, and it's something that like you said, silence is so hard to find in this day and age. But music is something that we can't control more of, because we can control the things that we listen to. I mean, obviously, there's all these devices: YouTube Music, Spotify, Alexa, whatever the case might be. But you can purposely put in whether it's classical or Gregorian chant, or and everyone's different, but it can really, again, bring you closer to God, elevate you closer to God, which I think is the ultimate point of music, if I'm not mistaken. But I do want to ask, as you, Daniel, how have you found it's been helpful for you and maybe your family to sort of reclaim this Sabbath and this holy day, to help share it with the world as well?
When I first really started to get serious about it was probably kind of right after my time at UD. So I just finished undergrad. I was back in New Orleans teaching. And I just made this decision at one point. I was like, I'm not doing schoolwork on Sunday anymore. Right? And of course, we could talk about like, when is it appropriate to do work and what kind on Sunday anyway. But I mean, it really brought so much more peace into my life when I just kind of made this decision, like, I'm not grading on Sunday anymore. I mean, part of it was that it brought more order into my life. So suddenly I wasn't just saying, I wasn't just sort of subconsciously treating Sunday as this kind of backstop for everything else, right? So it wasn't just like, well, I got to Friday, now I can just do whatever I want until Sunday, right? And then at least I'll have Sunday, after Mass, I'll have all day to get those papers done and do all these chores and all these sorts of things. So I became much more intentional about using the rest of my time prudently, right? Getting things done kind of in their ordered ways. Um, I mean, things have transformed a lot since we started having children. So I mean, we have 4 children now. We just had our 4th about a month ago.
Oh, congrats!
Thank you.
How are you on the podcast right now, Daniel? Are you sleep
Yeah,
deprived?
I mean, my wife is really, really generous. So she really holds the fort down in a lot of ways. But I think still, I mean, making it clear to ourselves and to our kids that Sunday is the day that everything else kind of revolves around, right? So it tends to be quite a bit. I mean, it's hard for it not to feel like work in some sense when you're, changing diapers and fixing lunches and, doing all the kinds of work that you have to do as a parent all day. But it becomes, I think, all that sort of work of ordering and healing and ministering takes on that kind of life of Jesus's work, right, in the Gospels when he's doing so much work of healing and ministering on the Sabbath. And in that, right, it creates a space of, for me and my wife, I think, a greater attention to God in all the moments of the day. And then, I mean, I hope for my children that, we try to do a lot of things like, going to the park, spending time outside in nature, listening to music, all these sorts of things that kind of go into reclaiming time, right? That I mean, something that's really critical, I think, is this notion of waste, right? So
Mm.
you learn a lot about what someone values by seeing what they're willing to waste on, right? So like whether it is having a good meal that took a lot of time to prepare, whether it's just going for a long walk at the park, when they're when you could be doing other maybe more quote unquote productive things with your time, whether it's just listening to good music together. All these sorts of things, I think, sort of demonstrate to children and to ourselves that this is a day that we lavish upon the Lord, right? So I mean, just as Mary like lavishes that aromatic nard on Jesus and anoints him, right? Sunday can be kind of that jar that we break upon the Lord, and kind of offer to the Lord, and so offer to each other as just a gift, as just a moment of presence. So I mean, it's celebrating the day, right, remains kind of the enduring task, right? It's something that uh yeah, my wife and I are like kind of always thinking about and kind of trying to press ourselves on, because it is I mean, it's just challenging. And that's something that I hope just arises from the book is uh just giving people a sort of renewed sense of hope in the possibilities of Sunday, right, as this day of restoration.
Yeah, and it's hard to do, like you said too, especially because we're programmed to do the exact opposite, and exactly what you said. And I love that you made that point. Is a walk to the park or just being silly with your kids. I mean, for some people out there, it's like, well, why don't clean dishes or do this or that or get some work done and things like that. It's like, yeah, you could do that, but this is more important. This is more fulfilling for your soul, which is ultimately the only thing that really matters is what's going on in your soul.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
Daniel, we talked about a few things here. We're going to be releasing this on a Wednesday. So for our men out there, especially those who are fathers, like you and like me, what's maybe just one thing, one simple thing that men can do to implement into their families to kind of reclaim Sunday as a holy day that you would recommend for them? I know I put you on the spot there.
Yeah,
I didn't give you a heads up on that question.
no, not at all. I mean, I think I think it's really critical just in that day that we as men attend to God, right? So in the midst of all the things that go into life, I think, I mean, what you see again and again in the lives of the saints is what moved them was so often the example of a good man spending time in prayer. So I think just really dedicating Sunday as a day of prayer, um, and making sure that, of course, Mass is at the heart of it. But then letting our children see us throughout the day, in moments of prayer.
I love that. Yeah, and then Daniel, for our listeners too, where can they find the book? Where can they learn more about you? And then any final words of wisdom you want to leave with the audience before we let you go?
Sure. So the book, I'd urge people to go to the Sophia Institute Press website to buy the book. It's also, of course, available through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Um, Lots of Catholic bookshops as well, right? And for listeners out there, if you have a preferred local Catholic bookshop, I'd urge you to ask the folks there about getting it there. As far as more about me, so I mean, I'm on Instagram at fitz.the.writer. I also edit a journal of arts and culture called Joie de Vivre, so people can find that at jdvjournal.com. Really love for people to join the conversation there. Uh, as far as words of wisdom, I mean, really the thing that I always come back to is Jesus's line in the Gospel of John, when when he's questioned about his Sabbath activities, and he says, "From the beginning until now, the Father is at work, and I am at work." as well, right? And that I think those words should be such a source of hope for us, especially when we live in a time that uh, is so obviously broken, uh, like many times before it, that whatever the difficulties of our age, whatever the difficulties we're experiencing personally, from the beginning until now, the Father is at work, right? And Christ is at work too. He invites us into that work, and he invites us, into that eternal now, right? That the now is where he's calling us to be, where he's been calling us from the beginning.
Wonderful. Well, I will leave links in the show notes for all of you for all the for the book, obviously for at Sophia Institute Press and Instagram and your website as well. I'm excited to read more about that, Daniel. But Daniel, thank you so much for your time. I know you are a sleep deprived dad, and I'll let you get back to your wife and help support the troops over there.
Wonderful. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. This was great.
Yes, thank you. And for all of you listening out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, go out there and be a saint.